This episode is meant to be a follow-up from the previous episode, so if you haven't watched that one, I suggest you go watch that one first and come back. But now we're going to be talking about optimism and what optimistic thinking looks like. Now I'm sure optimism needs no introduction. There's a good chance that you, the listener, are an optimist yourself, and if not, you at least know some other people who are. Optimism is the attitude that believes in things like hope and success and all that. This stands in contrast to pessimism, which is the attitude that things will go wrong, that things aren't as peachy as the optimist would like to believe. And I think everyone's also aware of the health benefits of being an optimist. We've linked optimism to having 50% greater cardiovascular health, longer life expectancy, and greater cancer survival rates, whereas we've linked pessimism to things like heightened chance of depression and chronic stress. Our mental lives can profoundly affect our physical lives as well. Now, a lot of what I've been saying is pretty common knowledge, but I think a lot of people don't fully understand optimism. And there's two things about optimism that I want to bring to light. First up is that people don't understand how optimists think. You see, optimism is known as an explanatory style, which basically means that it's a way of perceiving the world, and it also helps us make sense and explain the world and our situations. What this means is that the very same experience can be interpreted in different ways by the optimist and the pessimists. And optimists think differently along three distinct categories in their experience of the world. And let's take an example to better illustrate this. Let's imagine that an optimist and a pessimist have both been laid off from a company. And let's keep all other things equal and say that they're both equally competent in their jobs. The first category is something called internality. Do they view the problem as something internal or personal, or do they view it as external? The pessimists would think that it's their fault that they got laid off from the company, that they must have done something wrong or stupid, that it's an internal problem. The optimist would think it's an external problem, and think that the company was just downsizing and couldn't have them anymore. Now here we're taking a negative example, but you can sort of flip it around when we're thinking of a positive example. The pessimists would think it's external and not of their own merit, whereas the optimists would be pleased with their own efforts and wouldn't downplay their accomplishments. The next category is something called stability. Do they believe that their experience will last indefinitely, or is it subject to change? The recently unemployed pessimist would believe that it was their fault that they got unemployed, and they'd have the belief that they would stay unemployed for the rest of their lives, or at least a very long time, and that it'd be near impossible to find a new job. Pessimists believe that setbacks are due to permanent, stable factors, usually themselves. The optimist, on the other hand, would not think this way. They believe that eventually they'd come across a new job and that they manage. They view setbacks as due to temporary or unstable factors, so they don't beat themselves up as much for it. The final category of the three is globality. Globality is about how you interpret problems in your life and how much it can spill out to other areas of your life. The pessimist would think that their unemployment is proof that they're an all-around terrible person who can't do anything right, and their failures in one area will inform their attitude to other areas of their life. They may believe that they're unlovable and unattractive, for example, things that are really only marginally related to their unemployment. So they believe the problem is global and not specific. The optimist would not let this problem affect them in their other areas of their life. They believe the problem is specific and not global. Just because you got laid off doesn't mean you can't do things outside of that. So those are the three categories that differ between optimists and pessimists. And it would do you well to know these things so that you can actually challenge your own negative or pessimistic thoughts. Optimism can be learned, And learned optimism is the polar opposite of learned helplessness, what we talked about last episode. It also happens to be the solution to learned helplessness. And it's not easy to learn this because you have to have a lot of self-awareness and be willing to challenge your deepest beliefs. It's not easy, but it's certainly worthwhile. More on that later. The second thing that people don't understand about optimism is that it actually comes in stages. The 3 stages of optimism are naivety, cynicism, and true optimism. Now, what people do is they often confuse optimism with naivety, with being naive. Naivety is also known as uninformed optimism. We know what naivety looks like because we know what naive people look like. We say that children are naive, and they often are. They don't have the knowledge or the experience of the world and of the terrible parts of the world. And so they're innocently foolish and generally happy. There's a famous saying that ignorance is bliss, and that saying sums up naivety really well. And emotionally speaking, it's certainly more pleasant than the next stage, which is cynicism. Cynicism is also known as informed pessimism. This is a step up from naivety, which didn't take into account the existence of facts. And if naive people were children, then cynical people would be teenagers. The thing about cynicism is that it's oftentimes characterized by arrogance. If I'm critiquing something, then that must put me morally higher than whatever it is I'm critiquing. That's the implicit idea that cynics act out, whether they're aware of it or not. Cynicism also brings about other negative emotions, because it's emotionally hard on you to be cynical about everything. It's certainly not easy to believe that the universe and everything within it is out to get you. And the sad thing about cynicism is that a lot of people can get stuck in this stage, that they can't see past the negative aspects of the world, that they don't develop and get to true optimism. True optimism, or what's known as informed optimism, is the final stage. If naivety were children and cynicism were teenagers, then true optimism would be the fully developed adult. They acknowledge the failures and shortcomings of the world they live in and the people they're surrounded by. The very same shortcomings that the cynic would despise and criticize. The difference is that they accept these shortcomings, that they decide, consciously or unconsciously, to focus on the good to be found in life. The primary emotion that makes up true optimism is gratitude. They're grateful for all the great and terrible things in their life, and they take it as a way to grow, and they've come to love the gift of life. They're grateful for what they have, and they work to make things better. The optimist may not be able to articulate these things and why they do things the way they do. They just do it. And there's something truly beautiful about that. I think we owe it to ourselves and to the people around us that we become a true optimist. I deeply believe that we all have the capacity to grow out of our cynical selves and to flourish as people. I believe this because I've seen this happen with the people I know and within myself to some degree. People grow out of their cynicism, as is evident by comparing teenagers and their adult counterparts. It's part of maturing, however unconscious it may be. Imagine a world where people were like this. What could we accomplish if every single human being was aiming at the good, at the betterment of their lives, at the betterment of humanity? I think we owe it to ourselves and to the people around us to stumble our way towards that ideal.